Hello again, Dr. Saldivar here. This video is for our April 6th class, which will be discussing the analysis and presentation of scientific data. The book chapter that I assigned for this class meeting is an introductory chapter from a statistics textbook, but I think it's pretty accessible. However, there are a number of technical points. As usual, there is a lot of material here that is would make an appropriate source for a quiz. So please be attentive as you read through the chapter. As usual, look at the section headings and the major topics that are outlined to give you an idea about what the major ideas are as you read through the text. However, in this short video, I'm also going to talk about the 4 or 5 major sections and highlight for you the specific ideas and concepts that you should focus on. So the chapter is divided into 5 sections, which I will throw up on the screen here quickly. The first section that I want to talk about is the one that discusses the idea of populations and samples. So briefly, a population is the entire universe of stuff, individuals or non-human beings, depends on what your research study is looking at. The population is the entire possible universe. So as a psychologist, if I am studying people, human beings, broadly defined, then hypothetically every single human being that's alive in the whole world is the entire population. But usually, depending on my research question on the specific topic that I'm investigating in a given study, really the population is much more limited than just every single human being in the world. For example, in my own research, I focused on science educators in secondary grades and post-secondary, so high school level, college level. So I could argue that the population that I study is science teachers, science professors, which is, of course, less than all the people in the world. The idea of a sample is that oftentimes we can't realistically, as researchers, be able to collect data from every single individual that's a member of a population. So we have to take a sample. We have to choose some number from the bigger population, and that smaller number, that sample, is the actual group from which we draw the data that are the basis of our study. Obviously, much more about this in the book chapter. In particular, there's a separate section that talks about different ways of selecting samples. So I encourage you to be particularly attentive because some of these phrases, well, the idea of sampling strategies, the idea of selecting samples, for example, the reading will describe the difference between random samples and convenience samples. It's important not just to understand these concepts for our class purposes, but the idea of sampling is something that's very fundamental to all kinds of empirical research, and it's an idea you will encounter over and over again, both as a student and then later as a professional. Every research article you read will have some discussion of the sampling strategy, the sample selection approach that was used in that research study. Sometimes a significant limitation of research is the sampling strategy. Sometimes we have to make judgments as scientists. We have to analyze data even if the samples are problematic or limited in some way. So understanding the basic issues that go into sampling are very important. So we've talked about the idea of population versus samples. We've talked about the idea of sampling strategies. Let me introduce a couple of other ideas that relate to actual data analysis, the actual statistical processes that we go through to analyze data. There's a section in the reading that talks about the difference between descriptive statistics and inferential statistics. These, again, are very important ideas. As the reading explains, descriptive statistics have to do with analyses, with explanations, however you want to think of it in your own mind, that pertain only to the sample, to the data that you are studying, that you have collected as part of your research. Inferential statistics are a set of tools that we use for data analysis that allow us to project from the sample for which we have data back to the larger population for whom we do not have data, at least not for the whole population. Again, we only have data for a sample, for some subset of the bigger population. And it turns out that there are a number of calculations, if you want to think of it that way, the number of calculations we can use from samples that can give us some idea about the broader population. And there's some examples described in the text, and we'll talk about some further in the class. You need to be particularly attentive to the section that talks about different types of variables. And again, this is a topic that we'll talk about more in our class, but also it's important for you to have a solid foundation in understanding what a variable is and what different, how variables are, different types of variables are described, because again, as a student further in your career and also as a professional later, you're going to read research that talks about different variables and the analysis of different variables and how these variables, what kind of variables you're talking about directly impacts the kinds of data analysis you can do. If you have a variable that describes a certain category, a categorical variable, which is described in the reading, for example, gender is a categorical variable. We have a category among human beings anyway, or I guess you could say even among mammals. Gender is binary. You're male or female, and the gender of male has certain characteristics, anatomical, physiological, hormonal, and the gender female also has certain characteristics. But we don't rank, in scientific terms, we don't rank male versus female. You can't do math. You can't multiply male by female because you're not talking about a numerical variable the way that you're kind of used to from algebra or calculus. So a categorical variable is something that allows us to understand some characteristics of a sample or a population, but it's not a kind of variable that we can do math with. A variable that we can do math with would be a continuous variable, which is also described in the reading. So these different categories of variables will come up over and over and over again in textbooks, in scholarly articles, in presentations of research. So it's important that you get a solid foundation in this, especially as prospective medical professionals, because this is central to all kinds of research that has direct impact on clinical activities, clinical techniques, and clinical settings. The final section of the reading talks about different approaches to visualizing data. Again, I urge you to be very attentive to this section. This is an area where a lot of undergraduate students often struggle because even if you've grown up, as you all have, using textbooks, using different materials for your studies, you often take it for granted when you see pie charts versus line graphs versus bar graphs. They all sort of blur together and it's all just sort of numbers or data. But the kind of visualization, and by visualization I mean a bar graph is one kind of data visualization, a pie graph is another, a line graph is yet another. Again, just as the kind of variable that you're working with, that you're analyzing, will drive the kind of analysis you can do, the kind of variable that you're working with, the kind of information you have, will also impact the way it could or should be visualized, and thus the kind of meaning that can be drawn from that visualization. So again, we'll talk about this more in class, but hopefully this introductory chapter will give you some food for thought, especially as you continue to work on your group research proposal for the course. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you in class.